So I decided to do for my presentation The Goddess of Spring, which is a Disney short film created in 1934. It's very short. It's about 9 minutes long, and it was created by Wilfred Jackson, directed by Wilfred Jackson, but produced, of course, by Walt Disney, because it was a Disney film, and it's actually a pretty historical film because it used one of the greatest technologies of 1934. The animation for it was actually pretty sophisticated for its time. Um, and the Goddess of Spring, even hearing about the title, you can kind of see where this is going and how it might relate back to Persephone in the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, which is the ancient work in which it was modeled after. And to begin, the plot begins with like flowers and tiny people singing and dancing, and enjoying the good weather of spring. And it seems like a very utopian world, and everyone's very happy and they're dancing. And then the Goddess of Spring enters, and everyone's singing. It's a very like uplifting part, and it's essentially paradise. And then the ground opens, and the devil, like Hades, rises up out of the ground and kidnaps the Goddess of Spring, and things go terribly wrong. And all of a sudden, she's in the underworld, and the Hades crowns her, and calls her the queen, like the queen of the underworld. He's like, I chose you as my queen. And meanwhile, on Earth, things have gone terrible. It's winter. It's gone harshly cold. The flowers have died. The animals that used to be singing are now crying. And it's really dystopian, almost completely night and day, winter, spring. You can kind of see where this is going. And so Hades asks the goddess, like, what he can do to make her happy, because he crowns her, he gives her all these diamonds, and she's still not happy. Um, and she's like, I want to go home. Like, bring me back. Like, this is what I want to do. I don't want to be here with you. And Hades thinks about it for a little bit, and then he decides, he's like, fine, I will take you back, but you must return here for half the year. And she returns, she accepts, and then she returns back to the world, and she sings and dances with the flowers and dances, and everything comes back to life, and it's obviously spring again. And so to remind you, for the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, this is when Zeus gave his daughter Persephone to Hades, and in a deal, and Hades kidnaps Persephone, and she screams, and Demeter, the mother of Persephone, hears the scream kind of faintly, and she knows that Persephone's gone. And she does everything she can to bring her back and to find her. And she convinces Zeus to tell Rhea to go and make a deal with Hades to try to get Persephone back. And it is successful with the term that Persephone must return to the underworld for half of the year. And that is how you get the seasons, and that is how like that story goes. And while it's not completely the same with the Goddess of Spring, obviously it wasn't going to be like a shot-for-shot reenactment. It did do a really good job of being pretty derivative of the Homeric Hymn to Demeter. And so a little bit of a contrast, like a few things that are different, is like the Disney's Goddess of Spring is a movie. Like, this is very modern for them to make a film. It's not like a Homeric hymn anymore. It's not a poem. It's a film. I'm visualizing. I can sit back and eat popcorn and watch this thing. I can visualize what actually might have happened. Something that really kind of aids in the understanding for those kind of times. They use a lot of the most modern technology to really get this message across, and I feel like that really like digs deep, and it really made a really good understanding within the audience, within the newer audience. So a few things about how they alter the plot line. So they obviously it's made for children. It's an animated cartoon, and so they decided not to mention or introduce any Greek goddesses and gods, which I think is a pretty good idea. Only because like it's very hard for small children to really wrap their minds around like the stuff that we have been learning this semester with all the deities and immortals and really trying to capture thematic patterns. I think that this oversimplified it and made it really easy for them to understand. And so due to this, Demeter and Zeus were never introduced, and the whole deal with Hades never happened. Hades just decided upon himself that he was going to give away uh, the goddess of spring. Um, and so the transition into the goddess of spring was actually pretty successful. I'd say Wilford Jackson and Walt Disney did a really good job, while trying to make it simple for kids and the new audience. And it's a different time period. This is over 2,000 years later than the Homeric Hymn to Demeter was first introduced. So I think that they did a really good job of catering to a modern audience where polytheism isn't obviously as popular anymore and not as familiar with other people. So trying to explain how seasons happen without using Greek gods and goddesses, they did a really good job of hitting that home here. One of the flaws in the transition is that it really doesn't explain how and why she leaves. Like you can argue that like why it goes into why she leaves, why when she leaves it goes to winter. No one really explains why that is. In the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, it's explained that Demeter curses the earth and makes it that nothing will be able to grow anymore while she's gone. However, when the goddess of spring leaves in the modern film, it's never explained why it just all of a sudden becomes winter. You're just like, oh, well, I guess whenever she's there it's spring and whenever it's not it's winter, which is pretty easy to understand. But at the same time, they could have really done a better job of trying to explain how integral her role in the weather is, because that was really never touched on as much as I probably would have liked to see it have. Um, and it's also worth noting that the characterization and personification of like the trees and everything, it kind of I don't know, it appears more catering to us because like when you're watching a film as a child or even as an adult and you see everyone singing and happy, they're exaggerating these feelings, they're exaggerating how good things are. And I think that that was really powerful in delivering the message home that this is the Homeric Hymn to Demeter. And so the modern film really helps our understanding. I thought it did a really good job of kind of translating this idea, because if you introduce the Homeric Hymn to Demeter of someone who didn't take a course like classics or someone who didn't take any like Greek mythology classes or study it for some time, it would be kind of hard to understand why Zeus did this, why Demeter would have the incentive to curse the world, and why Hades wanted a queen. These are questions that people would have had if those kind of things were introduced, but they weren't. And so I think that the modern film really aided in that. Additionally, I think it's worth noting that the visualization and actually making it into a film really helped us understand. Even me, who only read the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, seeing Hades crown her, seeing how distressed she was, because that was never really touched upon. There was never really a scene in the underworld where you see Persephone grieve. This was something that you can see in the Goddess of Spring, in Disney's Goddess of Spring. Visualizing all these different things, and obviously, like I touched on it before, the characterization and personification of these different plants and animals, it really drives home the notion that when she's there, things are good, and when she's not there, things are bad. And I think that really helps the understanding of even an educated person like me and someone who's not. And so it also, I think that it offers a perspective that Hades had some inner conflict. That's something that really wasn't touched upon in Homeric Hymn to Demeter. And because in the Goddess of Spring, he decided by himself to let her go, which is a very interesting notion that I thought was pretty good that they touched upon. And so, in summation, the Goddess of Spring was pretty successful recreation of the Homeric Hymn to Demeter. I really thought it offered a lot of new perspectives, especially with the visualization. I think that really drove it home. And the time period, I found it really interesting how they bridged the gap of 2,000 years to actually make this happen. They did a really good job of that. And the slight changes of the plot line I thought were pretty necessary to really make it a film that would be successful and that people would enjoy. And so The Goddess of Spring, was a very enjoyable film. And I had a good time tying together the time gap and evaluating the similarities and differences in the Homeric Hymn to Demeter. It was very fun. Thank you.